one of the most sort of countercultural, subversive things about the Jesus story is the invitation to deal with your mortality and not to dismiss it, not to live in denial of it. Depending on how you grew up, I think a lot of times, especially as a kid, it can be really healthy if it starts when kids are young, knowing that death is a thing and knowing that there are healthy ways to deal with death. So we're excited to have the kids with us. We'll see how a sermon goes with all these kids in the room. And it won't necessarily be for them, but hopefully they'll pick up on it. So in middle school, one Christmas morning, we opened all our presents, and then there was a knock at the door, and it was our neighbor down the street named Ross. And my mom was like, go to the door, and she had this like silly grin on her face, and none of us knew what was going on. And Ross was standing there with a really nice road bike. And my dad opened the door, and Ross started to like walk in the house with a bike. And my dad didn't understand, had no idea what was going on. My mom had been saving for a long time and like squirreled it away where my dad didn't know, and had gotten him this really nice, like at the time, top of the line road bike. It was a Trek 5200, carbon fiber, really good. I didn't have any idea my dad was into biking, but all of a sudden he was like this professional level cyclist. So he got really into cycling. That's it. This would have been like 95 maybe, top of the line for the time. So fast forward probably 10 years, I've graduated college. I'm thinking that I want to get into biking. My dad is not biking that much anymore. And so my dad gives me his bike. And he has smaller feet than I do. So immediately I replace the shoes, and I replace like the clips and the pedals, kind of upgrade that. And then I also have to replace the seat post and the stem so the bike fits me a little better. And then over time, replace the chain, normal wear and tear. And then I decide I'm going to get a new wheel set, better wheels. And then I'm cycling more, so I get a new component set. And the rear derailleur actually breaks off the bike. And so I call Trek, and they say, Trek customers are customers for life. We're going to replace the frame. So it's the same bike frame, but it's a new one that's not broken. And what happened is, over time, I replaced every component of that bike. And yet, if you had asked me, tell me about the bike, I would have said, what? This is the bike my dad gave me, right? This was a gift my dad received, and my dad passed that gift to me, even though the bike was entirely different, right? The bike my dad gave me wasn't there, and yet somehow that was the bike that my dad gave me. And the idea that I think is relevant for us is that sometimes it's more in the pattern than it is in the actual components. Or we could put it like this: what goes on is more in the gift than it is in the gears. There's something that is given, and then that gift is given on, and it doesn't matter that it's actually an entirely different bike. It's not the same material bike, but we would still say that's the bike my dad gave me. Angela was telling me during the dinner, I asked what they brought, and they said they brought mac and cheese, and it was from her grandma Young, right? And so I asked about the recipe, and she goes, oh, well, she was a horrible cook. So it was like cream of mushroom soup and some sort of cheese, whatever she had. She's like, that's not the recipe. Like, what I do is actually like great mac and cheese. And yet, when I asked her, what did she say? That's my grandma's mac and cheese. Totally different recipe, but that's my grandmother's mac and cheese, right? So there's this idea that somehow it's not the material thing. It's not the literal thing, but there's something underneath it that goes on. We've been sort of, for the last 5 weeks, I think, reforming, sort of moving away from literal and metaphysical understandings and embracing the power of symbol and the power of myth and ritual that can call us to something more, call us to something beyond just what's literal. And so I think the way of saying it's more in the gift than it is in the gear is to say that there's a way that we can live that transcends just our material life or our biological life. And I want to be very clear that this is not something, I don't think it ever should be handled purely intellectually or just theoretically, and this is certainly not so for me this year. This has been a significant year of loss for me. Our year started with the loss of 3 of our great friends, Bill and Renee and Ryan McCullough, and I know a lot of you know them, and I got sidelined today. I've spent most of the afternoon crying. I came in and Jess and her mom Chris and her dad Scott spent most of the morning this morning putting up, if you haven't been in the lounge, it says the McCullough room. And we had talked right after this family died suddenly in a car accident about sort of setting aside the lounge and naming it in their honor. And they got that done today in time for Dia de los Muertos as a way for us to continue to commemorate them. So that was the end of January. And then later in the year, we lost our dog, Oscar, we lost our dog, Oscar. And this is, that handsome devil on the right is my grandfather, Conrad Sr., and then my dad, Conrad Jr., and then I'm Benjamin Conrad and Huck Conrad, 4 generations of Conrads. We lost my grandfather a couple months ago. So when we talk about the afterlife, when we talk about memory, we talk about death and what happens after, I know this is personal, and I know it's heavy, and it's something that has to be handled well. It has to be handled with hope. I said at my grandfather's funeral, we read the same text that we just read, this idea that we're love letters. We're all love letters. And we're written on by the people that come before us. We're their love letters, and the people that come after us, we write love letters in their lives. And these things continue to go on and on. And Pete Rollins says, love letters always reach their destination, meaning when we write the letter, it's us that needs to express that thanks, that needs to express that memory. And so it's reached the destination because we've done that work, whether or not it ever actually gets to the person we wrote it to, that we've said our piece. And so part of what we've said in the last few weeks is that we're trying to understand everything, right? We're trying to understand not just the Christian tradition, not just faith, but our entire lives differently as a result of this idea that God is not understood just to be up there, or God is not understood to be out there, but that somehow God is known in the depth of everything. That God is the Spirit in whom all things live and move and have their being. Paul Tillich, in a sermon called The Depth of Existence, he says, the infinite and inexhaustible depth and ground of all being is God. That depth is what the word God means. And so it makes sense that for a long time, the afterlife has been understood to be either up there, right? You die and you go up there, or the afterlife is out there, but that it's always been understood to be somewhere else, that it's disconnected from us, that our connection to those after they die is coming from out somewhere else, because we've always understood the afterlife to be connected to God, and God was always understood to be out there or up there, beyond us, unreachable. And so if we reimagine God not as up there, not as out there, but in here, in the depths of our lives, in the day-to-day lived existence of everything that we are and everything that we do, in our human relationships, in our work, in our play, it changes again our understanding of the afterlife. We no longer eject out of this life when we die to the blue light special buffet and pinochle game in the sky. We're invited to find some meaning of life after death in the midst of this existence, in the mystery of memory. In the mystery of memory. And I want to be clear, when I say memory, we talked about this at Occupy, and this was a really powerful conversation. When we talk about memory, and especially the sacred aspect of memory, we're talking about more than just recollection. When we say memory, I'm not just saying remember a specific story, sort of like play the slide loop or the movie reel in your mind, remember when. Memory is more mysterious than that. It's not a means of removing the mystical connections or ecstatic visions or dreams and visitations of our dead loved ones. It's precisely to say that our loved ones go on in more than literal, more than metaphysical ways, that they're not trapped somewhere else, up there or out there, but that they are and continue to live on in here, in us, in our lives, because that's where God is. And so if what we understand after life to be in some way connected to God, and again, it's a mystery, then it's here. It's not somewhere else. It's not disconnected, but it's in us and a part of us. I got in a lot of trouble around Easter, mostly because I don't think people understood this word. I think I said in an Easter sermon that I was agnostic about the afterlife, and I got accused of being an atheist a bunch, which is, has merit. But Agnostic means without knowledge, and since I've never been dead, I don't have any knowledge of what comes after life. And so I'm agnostic about the afterlife. I have my hope about the fact that stuff goes on, but I found it really interesting. I had these conversations in the last couple weeks. Kai, who if you haven't gotten to meet, Kai's been coming around and is going to help out with stuff at Collective. We were talking the other day about the afterlife, and he was sort of asking these really great questions about, sort of these traditional understandings and how these traditional understandings have been so oppressive, so punitive, predominantly for people who already suffer in this life, that then they get punished again when they die for the way that they've suffered in this life. And I said, yeah, these are unconscionable and unforgivable things that religion has communicated to people, saddling them with fear. And we've got to stop that. We can do better than that. And I had this conversation with Jacob, actually, who's playing guitar with us and hanging out in the band. A couple weeks ago when we did the Jesus stuff, I was telling him about it afterwards. And he was kind of like, man, it sort of sounds like you've undone this emphasis on the afterlife. And I was like, yeah. And he goes, well, I don't understand. Then what are you selling? I was like, yep, exactly. This is it, right? If there's something we're selling, it's actually life before death. It's a depth of existence now. It's the way that the people we've lost continue to live on in us now before we die. The life that lives on precisely because it's the kind of life that is worthy of being remembered. The life that lives on because it's the kind of life that's worthy of inspiring the people that come after us. Speaking of which, this one is from 3 weeks ago. So how do we understand the afterlife in light of this big cosmic story? And if you aren't here for this, you might want to go back and check it out. But essentially, we said we're a part of a story that's about 14 billion years old. And it's a story of increasing complexity and depth and unity. And we've only recently gotten the human consciousness sufficient to reflect on this. And that all through it, there seems to be a force or a spark or an engine or a spirit. Some call it God, some call it love, some say God is love. But the idea is in this, right, if this is the God story, if we die and return to God, if we die and go back into this, and in this story, everything is stardust. It all started from the same sort of tiny particle, exploded. So if we return, right, we can't escape this because this is the story. We go back into this, right? We return to this. The energy is sort of recycled. We put people in the ground. They come back into this story. And some people hear that and they go, well, that sounds super Buddhist. Fair enough. It's also super Christian, right? Because we have things like, in God we live and move and have our being, right? And from dust we come, and to dust we shall return, right? And the fact that that's stardust, I don't think really matters much. It's the story we've been telling for a long, long time. And the point is, again, it is more in the pattern than it is in the particles, right? The life that we're talking about, what it is that goes on, is more in the big picture than it is in the materiality of these lives. And so what if holding our loved ones in the light and mystery of memory is actually an invitation for us to do the work of afterlife, for us to give them an afterlife as a living legacy, as love letters written not on tablets of stone, but on human hearts? What if our loved ones actually do continue to speak to us through us? I find mostly that's how it happens, right? We have visions and visitations of our loved ones, and it happens to us through our senses, through our imagination, in our dreams, as we continue to hear the things that the people who we love who have died continue to say to us in our memory. From the depths, not from some outside realm, not from up there or out there, but from somewhere deep in here, where they live on. Not disconnected, not dislocated, but they're actually with God, right? The important thing is that God is in us. The afterlife isn't somewhere else, not at some other time, not dislocated, not disconnected, but here, now, in us, all around us. We are their love letters, and they are our love letters. So we're going to take a few minutes We're doing great. We're going to practice this, and you should have plenty of inspiration, right? From the guided meditation, from the conversations around your tables, from the reading of this text. And if you want to help the little ones, if they want to write something, if they can't write so well, feel free to do that. But let's just take like 2 or 3 minutes. And this doesn't have to be an eloquent letter, but if you just want to make some bullet points, the idea is, oh, that's not what I meant to get. Hold on, we'll get back to that in a minute. I want us to think about what it is that you would write to the people that you've lost, how it is that they already live on in you. And so you can actually write a letter to them, a letter of gratitude for the things they've passed on. And this is stuff we've already been practicing tonight, but I want you to have it so that you can take it with you. So take about 3 minutes, and you can either share these around or you can just keep it at your table. But what is it that you would write in the love letter to the people who have written love letters on your hearts? Like the bike that we started with, and part of that big cosmic story is this really interesting reality that about every 7 years, the human body entirely replaces itself on a cellular level. That the way that our cells die and are replaced happens entirely every 7 years. So in the same way the bike became an entirely different bike and was somehow the bike, I am an entirely different person than I was 7 years ago, and yet I'm somehow the same exact person. And it's that same idea that this life that we're talking about, whatever it is that goes on, is seen more in the pattern than it is in the particles. Whatever it is that makes me me is somehow present. My energy and life and values and contribution remain, even though I'm biologically different. Even though that literal material me is gone. Think about what that means for our understanding of the afterlife. If this already happens in our lives, that something of me can go on even though I'm gone, that I'm somehow still mysteriously here, even though the me that you used to know is not actually here, what says that this is not the same way that this mysterious thing we call afterlife, the way that we experience our loved ones, the way that they live on in memory, isn't somehow connected to a similar reality like this? I think this is the beauty in the work of Dia de los Muertos. It doesn't claim a literal location, or it doesn't claim metaphysical certainty about what the life after death or afterlife is. Instead, it calls those who have died into the present, into our experience now, in memory. It feels and experiences them in and from the depths of our lives. One of my favorite quotes, "Our dead are never dead to us until we have forgotten them." This is the message of Dia de los Muertos, that life after death means that we are responsible to keep our loved ones who have passed alive in the land of the remembered. That it's our job to hold them in the light of memory so they don't live on in the land of the forgotten, so that the best of them lives on in us. So that the life and the energy and the joy and the laughter and the kids, the sound that fill this room is the kind of thing that we continue to perpetuate in our lives moving forward. Thinker, theologian, writer Barry Taylor, this is back to being dark, but it's one of my favorites. He imagines the Last Supper, he imagines the Eucharist. He imagines Jesus saying, one day everyone at the table will become a part of the meal, which is the cosmic story, right? We live, we die, we're put in the ground. We nourish the food that will become the meal for those who come after us. And then he imagines one of the disciples asking Jesus, do you believe in the afterlife? And without hesitating, he says, yes. Yes, I believe in the afterlife. I believe in the lives of those who come after me. Do you believe in the afterlife? Yes. Yes, I believe in the lives of those who come after me. Remember me. Come after me. Tonight we're going to celebrate this memory. With some delicious Dia de los Muertos bread. It's very sugary. It is. It is all over me. A memory of body broken and blood shed. The memory of a life that's worth dying for. One that's worth living for. And so we're invited to that table and as well invited to participate in the way that the memory of our specific loved ones is a part of this tradition, a part of this call to live lives of sacred memory, not recollection, but memory, the spirituality of memory. And so if you want to take the Eucharist, feel free. You don't have to in order to participate in lighting a candle, but if when you've done the Eucharist, you want to grab the lighter, it's right here. I won't touch it because sugar hands. You're all going to touch it anyway, so it'll be fine. Feel free to grab it and light a candle for a loved one. Let's probably keep it to one candle per person. I know you've got probably multiple loved ones you could light a candle for. I don't think we have enough. So such that everybody can participate in that. You don't have to do the Eucharist to light a candle. You don't have to light a candle to do the Eucharist. But let's take some time. We're going to have some music. And you're invited again to this table and to this ritual as we bring together memory in the life of our tradition and our community. As always, this table and this altar are set for all people, and no one will ever be turned away. Come when you're ready.